Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today we're going to talk about an important issue relating to our physical and emotional well being. The topic is eating disorders, and my guest is the author of a best selling book that moved me deeply. Her book is entitled Starving in Search of Me, a coming of age story of overcoming an eating disorder and finding self acceptance. I'm pleased to welcome award winning author Marissa LaRocca. Marissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Harvey, for having me here.
Marissa, your book is a very personal memoir tracing your life journey through a severe eating disorder, specifically anorexia and bulimia, and explaining how the key to recovery was to develop insight and acceptance into who you really are. You start the book by saying that what appeared to be a food disorder really had nothing to do with food at all. Did that realization shock you?
Absolutely, and I think it was a lot of the motivation for writing the book because I feel like before I had an eating disorder, my opinion of eating disorders, like kind of the stigma of eating disorders in the world, is that they really are about food, or if anything, they're about body image and superficiality. So it was hard to find myself in my eating disorder to accept that I had one because I knew that it was neither of those things for me. It was just like lifestyle imbalance and anxiety and just a lot of repressed feelings. So I think a lot of that came up when I was actually in the process of writing the book. I was like started to write about food, and then I realized that it was really about so many other things, and that that's just the way it was manifesting. Just like if somebody was self-harming in another way or vacuuming compulsively, it can manifest in many different ways, but the feeling was what was really motivating the disorder.
I want to give people a sense of your personal story. Growing up, you felt like an outcast because you were painfully shy and you were in a state of fear and confusion about your sexuality. You said your anorexia was a coping mechanism to distract you from your social anxiety, sexual confusion, and undeveloped sense of self. You said the number one reason why you suffered from an eating disorder is because you didn't trust your body or yourself. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think, well, some of what I get into in the book is just growing up with kind of an overprotective, especially my mom, growing up in Catholic school, just growing up with a lot of rules and rules and rules, and you can't do this, and you have to be this, and you can't do this, and you should feel bad about this, and shame. I think shame is huge here, to the point that I didn't really have a chance to develop a good sense of self because I never really got that freedom or the chance to be on my own. So I didn't. I think that when I finally went to college, which is kind of when the eating disorder started, I didn't know what to do with that freedom or without having like something to contain me. So I created my own container in the way of an eating disorder at that time.
In describing what led you to basically starve yourself and exercise compulsively, you said you had failed socially and were incapable of relating to others. But you had friends at college. What made you feel like you were a social failure?
Ooh, these are good questions. I felt like it was taking a I felt like I was performing. I felt like it was taking a lot of energy. I felt like I wasn't really feeling safe enough to show people my authentic self. And I think a big part of that is because I didn't really know my authentic self. Again, probably because I never had a chance to find that person until I took that time later on. But before then, I just felt like this lost kind of floating person.
So, what advice do you have for parents and teachers about the best way to deal with painfully shy children? Because you were really, really shy.
Yeah, I think attunement is such a big word in psychology. My sister's a therapist, so she's told me a lot about that. I think it's so important that parents attune to their children's unique, personality and needs because people are so different. And I think kids just get put into this system where they all go to public school, and that is like public school is like an extrovert's playground. It's not for like introverted, more artistic types. They don't excel there and they develop shame. We develop shame when we're reading our environment as like not a place where we're excelling, where we're looking at other people and being like, I'm not like that. Then the next thought that a kid has is, so something's wrong with me. I'm not like that, so something's wrong with me. And that just becomes your programming. So I think attunement, not only in the home, is important to look at what your kid needs and not just give them what you think they need, not just throw them into like piano lessons or sports because you think that's what you should do. pull out of the kid what they need at home and at school too. I think the school system needs to shift a little bit so that everybody's not thrown into this pool where like some people are celebrated and some people are not.
Marissa, at the height of your eating disorder, you were 5'8" and 112 pounds. When you looked in the mirror, what did you see?
Honestly, I wasn't unhappy with myself when I looked like that. I know it's a thing with eating. Everybody has their own unique story with it, but some people, like, no matter how much weight they lose, they look in the mirror and hate themselves. I was pretty pleased with myself. I just had to keep looking at myself to make sure that I could see my pelvis in the mirror or like my collarbone, you know. Yeah, I just also want to say that with eating disorders, it bothers me that there's, I don't know if there still is, but there once was like a certain BMI that you had to like meet, that being like your weight height ratio in order to like qualify as having an eating disorder. And I like to take numbers out of it because I think that you can look at someone and not even know that they have an eating disorder. And it's, to me, it's more about how much space is this taking up in your mind, because there are a lot of people out there that struggle with different forms of eating disorders that you would never know by looking at them. I was pretty pleased with myself as long as I could maintain that weight, but if I was a pound over, it would ruin my day.
So when people told you that you were too thin, how did you answer them?
I remember one time being in the kitchen at my parents' house and my sister looked at me and said like, "Oh, this is disgusting. I can like see every vertebrae through your t-shirt." And I just told her to shut up or something. But then when I went in the other room, I was secretly like, yes, like I just like loved that. Like if somebody said that I looked sick or disgusting, that was like a compliment. If they said I looked healthy, that was like I felt like I had to go jump on the treadmill for 6 hours.
So how long did you have an eating disorder?
I think it was like started around age 18, 19, and through to my early 20s. I would say it was like people have different relationships with the word recovery. I'm comfortable saying that I'm fully recovered, but I think that that was a long process and it took different phases. So it's hard to say. I certainly couldn't say like a day that I like on this date and time I felt recovered. But I think from like 23 to 27 or 28, I'm 34 now. So like from 23 to 27 or 28, I was going through different phases of recovery, to the point that I definitely wouldn't say I have an eating disorder now. But I think our relationship with food is something that we have to constantly navigate, and it evolves over time.
In your first year of college, you reached out for help from the campus psychologist and you were basically dismissed. Do you think that happens a lot?
I wonder, and again, it's like attunement. I think it's dangerous for people without a good sense of self to trust authorities who are not attuning to different students and their needs, because I again felt like something was wrong with me. Like, oh, I'm even beyond help when I go to a psychologist who I was afraid to even go to. Even she's not really seeing me, you know?
You wrote that we should avoid the cliche of blaming eating disorders on, and I'm quoting you here, young girls with low self esteem who look at too many fashion magazines. Marissa, that is the common perception of the root cause of eating disorders. Why is it wrong?
Oh yeah, I guess it still is for a lot of people, the perception. Because it can run a lot deeper. I think it can be a lot of things, which I do explore in the book. I think for me, more than anything, it felt like an existential quest to kind of under like it wasn't even all bad. I like to also avoid the words good and bad, but it I think part of it was a self-discovery process for me. I wanted to kind of see where my limits were. How far could I push myself? Where did I end and where did the world begin? And it was kind of existential. Like I was really into philosophy at the time, and just what is my body? Like what is anything? you know, it was kind of felt very something like that, and not superficial at all. It felt like this deep thing that I was trying to figure out and trying to understand myself. So that's why that perception bothered me so much.
Eating disorders seem to have become an epidemic in our society. Do you have any idea why?
Oh, they're really, really bad right now too with the pandemic, because I also work on an emotional eating course for the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, and it is I don't want to say incredible, but it is incredible how many people struggle. Why I think it's an epidemic? Well, that's for a lot of reasons. First of all, depending on where you live, I think many societies, the default of the food that's available is not healthy for you. So you have to, in order to eat healthy, you have to have some education about what healthy food even is. Like, it would be easier if our environments were all set up to nourish us, like if we all lived on a farm and had like farm fresh food at our fingertips and that's what was like convenient, then more people would eat that way. But when you have McDonald's at every corner, and just those options, and then the lifestyles that many people lead, which are 9 to 5 jobs or more than 40 hours a week that they're working, so you don't have your daily schedules not set up for you to eat healthy either, unless you exert a lot of like energy and prep work and things. So it takes education, it takes prep work, it takes also knowing like your body and what works for you. It takes knowing how to kind of pleasure yourself with food, while also making healthy choices, which I think is a process of getting to know, like, okay, here's a way that I can eat something that satisfies me on this level and this level and this level. Like, we have to pay attention to satiation too, or else you're gonna like binge later probably. So I think it's the world doesn't really give us enough space to get to know ourselves, and it doesn't give us enough options. In most societies, we don't have enough convenient options that are healthy. So I think that's a big reason why people struggle. And then I think lots of people are just leading lives that are not fulfilling to them. So they're searching for something through food. I think it's probably more common for people to have like binge eating disorders and overeat because they're searching for something. But I think people who restrict are also, I think that comes from a similar place of just lifestyle imbalance and not being fulfilled and searching and seeking something.
In your book, you identify 4 types of people who are susceptible to eating disorders. Number 1, highly sensitive people who care more about others than themselves. You call them people pleasers. Number 2, perfectionists. Number 3, exceptionally open-minded philosophic thinkers. And number 4, people who experience gender dysphoria. Why do you
Mhm.
think these particular personality types are more prone to eating disorders than other people?
Your questions are so good. I honestly wrote this book without doing a whole lot of research about what studies people have done, what like research studies, because I wonder like what common threads maybe bind people together who have struggled with eating disorders. And I think taking them one at a time, people pleasers. So I think that comes down to not having a good sense of self and just putting, okay, I see this in a lot of my clients too, because I work with some young girls actually who struggle with food issues. I think when people don't set boundaries for themselves because they're trying to please others, then they are going to feel violated. They feel like everybody's taking from them. They don't have a safe space. You want to then create a container for yourself in the world and a barrier. And I think an eating disorder can become that. It becomes the secret kind of safe space, even though you're hurting yourself. It's not different from cutting or something like that because you're hurting yourself or punishing yourself, but still you're in control of that. And that becomes a safety because you feel so out of control when other people are just violating you and taking things that you're not standing up for yourself. So that would be the people pleaser. Okay, perfectionism, I think that's a known common one for people with eating disorders to be often perfectionists. I think there's usually an obsessive compulsive disorder, like an OCD component. My eating disorder involved a lot of fixations on things being in a certain order or eating in a certain number of hours. And I think the more you starve when you starve your body, you also starve your brain. And I think the more you starve your brain, this like physiological delusion starts to happen for people with restricting eating disorders, where you're not thinking clearly. It's almost like being on a drug. It makes it easier to just get fixated on things. What was before gender dysphoria?
Exceptionally open-minded philosophic thinker.
Oh, yeah, that's my favorite one. I think it's important to take some of the shame and stigma away from all mental health disorders, including eating disorders. And that's the part where I say, let part of it be self-discovery and a journey, and let that part of it be good. Because I think for me, it was self-discovery. It was an existential quest. And I think a lot of people who would identify as like artists or writers, I definitely am a writer. I think they just have this curiosity about the world that is okay. And sometimes they explore that in ways that are self deprecating. And sometimes that's part of their process. And maybe now, in my as the more involved being that I am now, I can explore that in ways that are healthier. But that's part of my process. That's part of my story, that at one point I was trying to go to those dark spaces in ways that could look very punishing of myself and were. but it doesn't mean that I didn't get something good out of it in a way as well. And then the gender dysphoria. Yeah, so I definitely, maybe I'm somewhere on the trans spectrum. Like I never wanted to take hormones. I mean, I've thought about it, but I don't. But it took a while to find my exact gender identity and how I feel most comfortable in the world. And part of my eating disorder was just wanting my body to look like a boy. Like I just wanted straight hips and no boobs, and I wanted to be scrawny because that felt, like this androgynous creature felt more comfortable to me than being womanly, if you will. And I think that's very common for people who struggle with their gender identity to have eating disorders as well.
You know, there's so much literature out there about body image and body shaming. You wrote, and I'm quoting you again, the most profound healing for me has occurred in the act of consciously inhabiting my body. How does one do that?
Yeah, that's like still hard. I think it's important. So I think I wrote this in the book that emotions ask not to be solved, but to be witnessed. I think if you're like a doer and a fixer type person like me, it's really hard to just sit with emotions because you want to do something about it. But I think that if we just make time maybe in our days to witness our emotions, whether that's making some time to journal every day or making some time to meditate or just making some time to focus inward and just say, check in. How am I doing right now? Like, what am I feeling right now? What's going on? Especially if I find myself doing something weird. Like if I find myself organizing my sock drawer at 3 a.m, I might be like, okay, Marissa, what's going on for you right now? Like you're stressed about something. Just checking in and having that communication with yourself. I think a lot of people avoid that. And I think it's important. And I think sometimes we just need to make time to feel. We don't need to think about what to do about the feeling. It will solve itself if we just make space for it. And if we don't make space for it, it might try to squeeze itself out in another way. Maybe you'll blow up at someone in traffic, or you'll, like I just said, like be organizing your sock drawer at 3 a.m, or you'll maybe get like a physical disease or something. You know, if you're repressing your true self for many years of your life, I think it can manifest in huge ways.
My favorite part of your book, Marissa, is the chapter where you give 10 tips to heal from self harm. One of those tips is to trust your intuition. That resonated with me deeply on many levels, especially personal relationships, career choices. I believe that when you trust your instincts, you're building self esteem because you believe in yourself. How do you
Mm.
peel away the layers of what everybody else expects you to do so that you can clearly hear that little voice inside of you?
Ooh, that's so hard to do too. I think more of the work is just getting to know yourself so well. I love what you said about it building self-esteem. When you, what was your exact words there? You said it builds self-esteem.
I said that you build self esteem when you believe in yourself.
Yeah, so I think that it can be helpful to think of yourself as your own best friend. So if you were in a situation where somebody was talking to your best friend in a way that was kind of degrading, you might stand up for them, right? And then your best friend might feel closer to you and actually think, oh, you're a loyal friend. I like being around you. And if you showed up for your friend all the time when they needed something from you, they would also feel those feelings of, you're a really special person to me. So if we show up for ourselves in those same ways, I think every time we have an opportunity when somebody makes us feel ashamed or small or bad, if we stand up for ourselves, you're like strengthening that relationship with yourself the way you would if you were your own best friend. And if you don't take those opportunities and you let that happen, I think you worsen your relationship with yourself, and that could lead to you wanting to punish yourself or hurt yourself. Like I think I used to never stand up for myself, and that was a big part of kind of that secret punishing behavior because I wasn't dealing with that stuff in life. So your question was how to peel away the layers, and I think it's maybe more about just consistently taking care of yourself so that you have a strong sense of self and self-respect. The more you do that, the louder your own voice is, I guess, like the louder you can let it be. Like if I'm at a party and I'm like, I don't want to be here, I will no longer have another voice that comes up and say, Marissa, you're so shy, like that judgment voice of like, you can't fit in anywhere, you're not good enough, you're inadequate. Instead, I'll just accept that from myself and be like, yeah, girl, you hate this kind of environment. It's not serving you. You'd be happier somewhere else right now. Take care of yourself.
I love that, Marissa.
Oh, good.
I love that at your age, and I do see you as very young, that you've already arrived at that place where you listen to your instincts and do what you think is right for you.
Yeah, I think it takes it can take a while.
It takes many people a lot longer than it took you. I just want you to know that.
That's comforting.
You've written a lot about the importance of setting boundaries in your life to properly manage your time and your energy and in your relationships with people. Why are boundaries so important?
They are. I feel like so there's this at maybe some carnivals or something. There's this. I don't know what it's called, but it's this. It's like a wire with a little hump, and you push a bowling ball, and you have to push it far enough that it goes over the hump, but not so far that it hits the next one. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think of that when it comes to boundaries because you want to set the bar just right that you're not restricting yourself from like opportunities and connections. You don't want to just be somebody that is living too much in your comfort zone and safety, but you don't want to make it so broad that you're allowing yourself to be too vulnerable to the world or violated, right? So I think it's really important to find that balance, and I think that it can kind of ebb and flow and shift from day to day and situation to situation. So it's like that constant checking in. It's important because I think we need to protect ourselves in the world. I think there's self-respect in that, in protecting ourselves by not letting everything in, and not saying yes to every opportunity. But there's also a lot to be gained from not having our doors too tightly shut and saying yes to things and trying new things. That's a form of self-care too, and exploration and living. So I think it's important to know ourselves well enough to know where that line is when it comes to relationships, when it comes to our jobs. What are you willing to tolerate? Where are you desiring to grow? Just constantly asking ourselves these questions.
I think that one of the biggest reasons I learned to develop boundaries was because this may not sound very nice, but there are a lot of people out there who are damaged and needy. And if
Mm.
you have a kind of personality like you and I have, where we try to fix, we try to rescue, you can be drained dry.
Oh, absolutely, Harvey. I think I put this term in the book too. Like I love saying that certain people or environments are energetically expensive because if we start looking at energy like a bank account, like we look at our money, look at our energy, and just be aware, like, wow, I had a 10-minute interaction with that person and my energy just went like way down. Or you can have interactions with people that actually raise your vibration and raise your energy, and you're smiling as you're walking away and you're feeling built up from that. It's important to pay attention to that, and environments too. Like, wow, I just went for a walk in nature and I feel like my energy is just like reinvigorated. Or I just walked through a loud noisy city and now I feel tired. It's like a bank account and we need to spend it wisely.
I think you've made a big deposit in my account today.
You as well, you as well.
You've said that writing the book was both agonizing and therapeutic. I wonder whether people going through these kinds of problems should consider keeping a journal.
I think that could be totally helpful, yes. And I think that as somebody writing this book, I think a lot of it was journaling. And I think I didn't include most of those parts because some of it was just getting some of the writing had to happen just to get to the writing that ended up being included in the book. I think it can be tremendously helpful to sit for long periods of time and just try to figure some of this stuff out. If you struggled with something as complex as an eating disorder, it can take a while.
It struck me when I finished reading your book, Marissa, that the lessons and messages in it are equally applicable to any addiction or self harming behavior. Do you agree?
I do. I think so. And that kind of made initially creating the outline for the book and writing it kind of difficult because that's what I arrived at was that it wasn't really about food. So in the self-help part, like I'm not going to tell people what to eat. I'm going to just talk about, how to take care of your soul kind of. I think, like I said in the beginning, I think people who self-harm in the way of cutting, I know that's common. My sister struggled with that. Like I have clients who are struggling with that. I think that that is one way to self-harm. Having an eating disorder is one way to self-harm. Some people vacuum their house compulsively. I keep going to that one because I had a neighbor growing up. These two girls that I used to hang out with, and their mom would just vacuum all the time. I think since some people do drugs, like I think that all of these people share something at their core, no matter what it looks like on the outside. We can't treat the symptoms, we have to look at the person. And I think it's important to share our stories for that reason, because mostly, I think at the root of all of these things, if I may just make such a blanket statement here, it's probably shame. It's probably some form of shame. And inadequacy feels like shame to me. Emptiness, void, shame, repression. I think most of the time when people deal with depression, it's because of things they have repressed. We have more in common than we think. And so many people feel like it's only them. So many people feel like they're struggling in isolation and that they can't tell anybody about this because it's embarrassing. And then they get so it starts with shame, and then they have some kind of disorder or behavior that they then feel shame about that, and it just becomes like these layers of shame, and they just feel buried and overwhelmed, and that's not good. So I think we need to share our stories and connect and realize that we're not alone.
I'm intrigued by a question you asked in the book. Are some emotional problems simply a gateway to helping us understand the truth about ourselves?
Yeah, I think that that comes back down to my passion for just destigmatizing like mental health issues. Because when we put them in a box and say like, oh, you have an eating disorder, so you're messed up, or you're destructive, or you're going through something, something's wrong with you. I think if we look at these things as opportunities and information instead, and approach them that way, we might be able to get through them way easier. Like, don't make somebody feel bad about something that they already feel bad about. I think that, like, as an adult now, like I just said, if I find myself doing something weird or blowing up at some, I don't blow up at people, but just doing something out of character, I might get curious about that. And I might say like, okay, maybe I'm upset about something. Let me make some time to just like sit with my emotions or journal or maybe meditate and see what comes up for me, and then deal with that in a responsible way. So if we look at eating disorders as or anything to that level, which would be more intense, as gateways to just understanding things about ourselves, like what's going on for you, like if you're struggling like that, what's really going on for you emotionally, I think that we'd get further.
With everything you've been through on your journey, do you feel compassion for the person you used to be?
Oh, absolutely. I think I say in like on like the last page of the book that if I could just go back and tell that younger version of myself that everything's going to be okay and she's enough, that I would do that. Yeah, I absolutely do, and I think that we need to appreciate our journeys and what we go through, and again, not layer on more shame, not regret, not judge ourselves. Be gentle with ourselves.
It must feel good to finally like yourself.
Yeah, it does, and I won't say I like myself all the time, but I think I accept myself even when I don't like myself. Yeah, it does feel good.
Another statement in your book that touched me is your take on being a good person. You said that being a truthful person, being true to yourself, is more important because if you do that, you will automatically be a good person. How did you get that wise?
Oh, I think just from life experience, and I definitely, yeah, I'm so far from perfect, and I every day is a new opportunity to find ourselves, I think. So there are definitely times when I'm not true to myself, and that usually creates some kind of it makes me upset, and then I have to rearrange whatever part of my life to get back into alignment, whether it's career or relationships. Again, thinking of energy kind of like a bank account, that if I'm aligned and I'm spending time with the right people for me, I'm spending time in environments that lift me up, I have way more to give. I have way more to give. Like if then, if somebody calls me on the phone and says like, hey, I really need help moving, I'll be like, I'll help you because I'm filled up. Whereas if I'm drained and I pass somebody bleeding on the street, maybe I won't notice them because I'm just like in my own exhausted world. And I think so many people just go through life in that kind of autopilot. They don't have much to give because they're not attuned to themselves. I think when we are attuned to ourselves and taking care of ourselves, we see more, we feel more, we want more, we love more. So I think that's why I said that it's more important to be truthful to yourself.
Well, Marissa, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show and share your personal journey with us so we can all learn from your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Harvey. Your questions were excellent, and I appreciate you taking the time to witness my words and read my book. And I appreciate you having me on your show.
I want everyone to know that Marissa has written another best-selling book entitled Everyone is a Freak: Anonymous Confessions About Sex, Sexuality, and Desire. Marissa, I hope you'll come back sometime soon and talk about that book.
I would absolutely love to, Harvey.
Our guest has been author Marissa LaRocca. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you to our producer, Steve Silver. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks, Harvey.
Remember to subscribe to the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. And be sure to check out more great interviews with Harvey Brownstone on harveybrownstoneInterviews.com.